And I would now turn to the chair of the NASA, the Space Subcommittee, and that would be Senator Nelson from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And seeing all the members here at the committee just reminds me how indeed privileged I am to be a part of this committee. I would think this is the cream of the crop of the Senate that serves on this committee.
Oh,
And
got my vote.
Eddie Markey, how do you like it at the end of the table?
It's better than being in the minority in the House. It's a much better view.
That is true.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I move that the modified substitute amendment that has been offered to agenda item number 11, the NASA Authorization Act of 2013, S 1317, be adopted so that it may serve as the base bill and be subject to further amendment.
The motion having been made, and the chair would second the motion, I would now put to the committee all those who are in favor of passage of Senator Nelson's proposal will say aye.
Now, this is the base amendment, and then it'll be subject to amendment. This is the...
Okay.
Yes, sir. This is so that this will serve as the base bill and be subject to further amendment. And therefore, Senator Wicker has an amendment, and I have some non-controversial amendments.
All right, then we'll proceed.
Is it adopted?
I thought you didn't want me to have it.
No. We need... Okay, then, whatever you say, Mr. Chair.
I think it was adopted because there weren't any no's.
Okay, I further move to adopt the following amendments to S 1317. The Heinrich Amendment as modified, the Warner 1 Amendment as modified, the Warner 2 Amendment as modified, and the Warner 3 Amendment as modified. All of them are non-controversial.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? It carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I'd like to speak on the proposal, and then I think Senator Rubio may want to speak to the amendment that he and I have co-authored with Senator Cruz. This is really, it surprises me to be bringing a sour note into a NASA reauthorization bill. It's usually not the way we've done things in the past, as the chair will acknowledge. Strong support for NASA over time in this committee. I remember Senator Hutchison being, as the ranking member of the full committee, being very supportive of us moving forward with a stronger NASA in the face of some of the proposals that we've seen in the last 4 years. So I'm disappointed that we would have a proposal unveiled essentially a week ago that we haven't worked on together in a bipartisan fashion. The bill contains reforms of NASA that have not been debated until today. But principally, I would point out that we need to pass the Rubio-Cruz-Wicker substitute amendment to acknowledge the budget realities that we are involved in today, and that's the reason for it. It just acknowledges that we live in constrained budget times and demands tough choices, and the substance of the amendment the meat of the amendment would be that it requires compliance with the Budget Control Spending Act levels unless otherwise changed. And for that reason, I can't support this legislation. I hope that the Rubio-Cruz-Wicker amendment will be adopted, and I will be able to support it, and we will be able to do as we've always done on issues coming from this committee, move together on a consensus basis. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Wicker, and I know that Senator Cruz, or Senator Rubio, you may want to
If I would just comment briefly, and then when we're ready for the amendments, I think Senator Cruz is going to present the amendment and explain the content of it. But however you want to proceed is fine, as long as I just want to be heard on it
All
before
right,
we.
well, Senator Cruz, why don't you present your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have an amendment that is jointly offered by Senator Rubio and Senator Wicker and myself. It is an amendment that simply provides that the NASA authorization be subject to the Budget Control Act. The Budget Control Act is, of course, existing law. This authorization disregards the Budget Control Act, absent the adoption of our amendment. And I would suggest that proceeding with an authorization while pretending that the existing law is something other than what it is not the most effective way to protect the priority that space exploration and manned exploration should have. Because the consequences of that, if we authorize a number that is above the Budget Control Act numbers, is that it will be automatically sequestered and reduced and done so in a blunt way across the board. I would suggest a better role would be for us to assess priorities and rebalance priorities, living within the realities of a constrained budget and existing law. I would note also that the House, in passing their authorization, endeavored to do just that, to live within the budget control limits and accordingly to rebalance priorities. And I would note that the effect of that is that the House version allocates or authorizes more funds, relatively speaking, for space exploration and manned exploration than would the Senate version after sequester kicked in and reduced it. And so I would suggest that we should not disregard existing law and we should act to protect the vital priority that is NASA, that is space exploration. And so I move the adoption of my amendment to S1317.
Mr. Chairman?
Is there a second? Second. Senator Rubio, did you have?
I'll defer to Senator Johnson if you want.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to be added as a co-sponsor, original
All right,
co-sponsor. Thank
so
you.
that it's done?
Who wants to
Chairman.
speak against it?
Am I recognized?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I didn't know what that look meant.
No, I was just looking.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief. I agree with the chairman and Senator Nelson that it's unfortunate that we may have a partisan vote on this bill today. I think it's safe to say that all of us, Republicans and Democrats, we want NASA to be successful. This is a program that's meant so much to the country, both in scientific advancement, but also as a source of pride and, quite frankly, the uniqueness and exceptionality of America. But while we may disagree over programs or destinations, we all want NASA to be successful, and we all want it to expand the reach of human discovery. Unfortunately, however, our country has a fiscal crisis that it needs to face, and we have to fund all our government agencies, including this one, with that reality in mind. Now, a moment ago, Senator Cruz described the Budget Control Act and the effects of sequestration. And let me just say, I personally do not believe that the sequester is the best way to get control of our runaway debt spending. I would much rather deal with the true cause of our debt in this country, and that is very important programs like Medicare that are structured, programs that I very much support. As I remind people all the time, my mom is a Medicare recipient. Senator Nelson and I share a state with a significant number of Medicare recipients. But unfortunately, these programs are structured in a way that are unsustainable in the long term, particularly for people of my generation. And we need to begin to address that. And until we address that, unfortunately, then spending reductions and balancing our budgets or attempting to do so is all going to come from moves like sequestration and make us make some very difficult choices regarding other essential programs in our government. And that, unfortunately, is the reality that we face today. And so in the absence of an effort to deal with what is driving our long-term debt, we are faced to make reductions in spending with this approach, which I think is less than ideal. But it's certainly better than not doing anything about the debt at all. So I hopefully that we can find funding for this program and efficiencies elsewhere in our government or within the budget. But at the end, I think it's critically important that we live by this law that now is in place with regards to holding in line spending, because if we retreat on that now, in the absence of any true entitlement reforms considered by the Congress, we're going to have a significant debt crisis in this country, which means we won't be debating about a NASA budget. we'll be debating about whether the agency even exists in the long term because the country won't be able to sustain the funding for what we want NASA to be about. I do want to express how unfortunate as well it is on the process, and Senator Nelson has expressed that frustration that for the first time the act will be a partisan bill, and I understand why he's frustrated. I know that Senator Nelson, my colleague from Florida, cares for this agency and the work it does and the men and women that serve it, and no one questions his commitment to maintaining America's space superiority. I am honored to serve with him and share in his frustration. But this is my first NASA authorization bill as a United States Senator. And being a senator from Florida, that means a lot. There are a lot of people in my state that rely on this agency and on the work it does, not just for their livelihood, but also to inspire the hopes and dreams of their children and future generations. It is a big deal for people in Florida's Space Coast. And it's unfortunate that my first vote on this may potentially be a partisan one. It's also unfortunate that we didn't have more time or opportunity to examine the legislation and to hold hearings on it, because it's not just about the numbers for us. Senator Nelson's right. There are good things in this bill, including the Kennedy Space Center. There are priorities that members on our side would like to move forward on as well, such as providing a longer indemnification period, identifying cost savings with the agency, increasing commercial participation in the space station, making underutilized or obsolete facilities and property that NASA owns available for commercial use. And I hope we'll have the opportunity to move forward on ideas like that. So I'll wrap up by saying I hope that we can work together to show that the Senate has weighed ideas from all members, examined the implications of sequestration, and fully deliberated the policies and programs that NASA will carry out over the next few years. The men and women of our space program deserve that. The future astronauts and the rocket scientists that we hope NASA will inspire deserve it too. And even though I'll be voting against this legislation without this amendment's adoption, I stand ready to work with you, Mr. Chairman, of course with my colleague from Florida and others as we move forward to consider it on the floor. But who knows, maybe the amendment will pass. So we're hopeful, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Other thoughts? I know there's some who would argue the...
May I? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to put to rest that this thing hasn't been considered. Senator Cruz and I were the only two people here, except for one or two on occasion coming in and out, for 3 hearings on NASA in this very room, in addition to what the chairman had referred to earlier, the interview that we did with the astronauts on board the International Space Station. This bill has been developed over the last several months. There is no controversy with regard to its content. Many of the things that my colleague from Florida just mentioned, these are not controversial items. They have been widely embraced. The only controversy here is over the question of authorization of appropriations as to the amount. I would remind my colleagues that the amount that is authorized in this proposed bill is the amount that is authorized by the budget resolution that passed the Senate several months ago. This legislation does not violate the Budget Control Act. That act only sets appropriations caps in 2 broad categories. The authorizing committees are free to set their agency budgets, and that includes NASA. And authorization of appropriations has no impact on the BCA limits. And so I would merely say in conclusion that what this authorization does, and Senator Wicker, you're correct, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson and I passed the 2010 authorization unanimously in this committee and unanimously on the floor. And then on the last night of the session of the 2010 session, had a 3/4 vote when it was brought up in the House on the suspension calendar. This bill builds on the direction established in that 2010 Act. And that's why there's no controversy with any of the content of the bill. It's merely what is apparently dividing along partisan lines as to the amount of authorization. Now, I want to remind everybody, when we lost the Space Shuttle Columbia in 2003, the Admiral Gaiman Commission that did the investigation, remember what they said? They pointedly noted that, quote, NASA has been asked to do more with less, and that was part of the reason that ultimately led to that disaster. The bill that's offered by Chairman Rockefeller and I today have the pathway for us going forward. The only policy difference with the House, and by the way, Senator Cruz, it is not true that the House appropriations bill appropriates more money for space exploration. When you compare category to category, they have different categories so that you can't compare the apples to apples. What is the only difference is that we are silent in our bill about mandating that NASA do an asteroid retrieval. We leave it up for the rocket scientists to determine the rockets. The House took the position that they wanted to ban an asteroid capture mission for astronauts to go to the surface of the asteroid. I don't think that is the position of a committee to be telling the scientists and the NASA experts of what we should be doing. That's the only major difference between the two bills. And so again, what we come down to is just an issue of what is going to be the authorized funding level. And I think it is sad, as you know, as I've talked to my colleagues, particularly the ones with NASA centers, such as Senator Wicker, such as my colleagues from Florida, such as Senator Cruz. We've never had a partisan NASA bill. This is the first time ever. And of course, the proof was in the pudding of how Senator Hutchinson and I worked together, how this entire committee worked together. So I think in some regards, we're going to move this on to the next step, and that is a positive thing. And maybe if we get the grand bargain and all of the appropriations starts coming together and tax reform and all of that, that then we can come back to our senses that we are not imposing an artificial budgetary sequester number that cuts the heart out of NASA trying to do all the things that it is doing. And that's what I hope, that what is today a disappointment for me, that as we move forward with the legislation, we're going to be able to ultimately come to agreement after all the big agreements are made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Boxer.
Thank you. Well, austerity has come to this committee. The fight over the future has come to this committee. And I have to say, it's extremely disappointing because austerity is a jobs killer, and that's what this is about. Now, I know we all know we're still coming out of the worst recession since the Great Depression and the worst deficits. President Obama inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit from George Bush, and now the estimated deficit is $642 billion. We still want to get it down, but please, to throw austerity before this country at this moment in time makes no sense. And I have to comment, and I so respect my colleagues, and I like my colleagues. That's not the point. It's just a very fair debate. And when Senator Rubio brings up Social Security and Medicare, I can't let that go. Because what you said, Senator, is exactly what the conservative Republicans said before you when those programs were put into place. Under FDR, Social Security, oh, it's a disaster, it's going to run out of money, scared the heck out of everybody. Well, it's still going, and it's one of the most popular programs in this great nation. Medicare, they said the same thing. Oh, it's terrible. You just talked to your seniors, I know. You said your mom loves her program. We can make it work. But I have to say, to see this happen, and we're so blessed to have Bill Nelson chairing this subcommittee. He's made that trip into space, and he knows his stuff. He knows it inside and out. And he's also a fiscal conservative, if I could say. So he's looked at this, and he hasn't put extra money into it. He's followed the lead of the Budget Committee. So in summing up, I would say to our friends, this is not the time to say we need austerity. This is the time to join hands and pass some smart authorization bills, appropriations bills. We're still going to get that deficit. It's on course to going down. By the way, I was here when President Clinton balanced the budget. And you know how he did it? Not with austerity, with smart investments in things like this, in education and infrastructure and the rest. So why don't we reason together and come out of this with a yes vote on this authorization?
Mr. Chairman,
Please, go ahead.
I'd like to respond, being on the Budget Committee, just to set a few facts straight. I mean, the fact of the matter is 45 Democratic senators voted for the Budget Control Act. It's also a fact that the Senate-passed budget exceeds the Budget Control Act. The thing that concerns me when I hear all these, I think in many cases good spending programs, programs that Americans want, is without some fiscal discipline. And I have to say, $640 billion deficit spending doesn't seem particularly austere to me. But what concerns me, and what we need to all be concerned about, is from 1970 to 1999, the average borrowing cost of America, the average interest rate we paid on our debt was 5.3%. For the last 4 years now, we've been borrowing about 1.5%. If global creditors look at the United States and say, these guys aren't serious about fixing the problem, and interest rates spike, just go back to that 30-year average of 5.3%, which is really pretty reasonable interest rates, what basically people pay in mortgages. That would add $600 billion per year to our interest expense. I mean, talk about crowding out spending, talk about not only a debt crisis, but a fiscal crisis. So, again, the reason I wanted to be listed as an original co-sponsor is it's extremely important that we take a look at each item of the budget and adhere to those spending limits that 45 Democrat senators voted for and the President signed. I voted against it because I didn't think it went far enough, but at least let's limit ourselves to that spending discipline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Johnson. Any others who wish to make an argument for or against?
Mr.
Senator
Chairman, I've been on many committees with Senator Boxer. I never get the last word. And I probably won't today. But let me just try to make three brief points. It just has to be said, since we're going back to 95 and 6, President Clinton never proposed a balanced budget until the American people elected Republican majorities in the House and the Senate. At that point, we began to have balanced budget. But he never proposed one until we got to town. Secondly, I didn't hear Senator Rubio say anything about Social Security and Medicare being a disaster. I heard his remarks to be that we need to make sensible choices so we can preserve Social Security and Medicare for people like his mom and like my dad. And there are plenty of members on the Democratic side of the dais who agree with this. In the early 80s, President Ronald Reagan, a strong Republican, and Speaker Tip O'Neill, as fine an advocate for the Democratic Party as I've ever seen, came together with a bipartisan agreement to save Social Security, and they did so without demagoguery and without rhetoric, and saved Social Security for 3 decades or more. We need that kind of leadership here, and I hope we're about to find it in the next few months. But then back to the Budget Control Act discretionary levels. And here's where I think we're unanimous on this side of the aisle. We fought hard for those budget savings. I would much rather more of them had come out of the mandatory spending. But we have achieved those discretionary savings unless we can replace them with smarter savings elsewhere. We're going to be having this debate at every forum, whether it's before the Senate Commerce Committee, on the floor of the Senate with regard to every appropriation bill. It is the most important debate we can have between now and whenever we get our discretionary numbers straightened out. We are not prepared to budge, and I think our House colleagues are not prepared to budge on the savings we made in the Budget Control Act. And so let's tailor, and that's why this amendment, and it's the crux of it. Senator Nelson is right. It's the budget numbers. Let's tailor this act to comply with the savings that are so hard fought. And that's what this debate is about and is going to be about between now probably and December. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Wicker. Any others wishing to voice their opinions?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just
Senator Kemp.
weigh in shortly. You know, one thing I never wanted to come to the United States Senate for was to be an appropriator. I actually wanted to be on the Commerce Committee. I believe in the mission of the Commerce Committee. Maybe it was all the good that Warren Magnuson did and investments that he made, just the whole notion of the NIH budget and what it's become as it relates to investment in biotech and new technology. I look at the big questions we have with NASA now and this weather issue and how do we improve weather information between NASA and NOAA. That's what I think this committee should be dealing with. That's what authorizers do. That is the nature of this committee. If you want to talk about the budget or you want to talk about how to make the appropriations bills live within their means, then that's great for the Appropriations Committee. But to try to arbitrarily set the authorization level based on what appropriators want or are already saying, I think is a misguided attempt to really turn the committee into nothing but the appropriations. And I think we have very important technology mission-driven oversight of these agencies that we have to focus on. So I would hope we would turn down this amendment.
Mr. Chairman, may I offer the motion?
You may.
I move that S 1317 as amended be adopted and reported favorably by this committee.
We had disposed of the amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, my pending amendment I had moved, and if there's no further debate, I would ask for a roll call on it.
Senator wishes to have a roll call. He shall have a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Nelson. No. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Pryor. No. Mrs. McCaskill. No. Ms. Klobuchar. No. Mr. Warner. No. Mr. Begich. No. Mr. Blumenthal. No. Mr. Schatz. No. Mr. Heinrich.
No by proxy.
Mr. Markey. No. Mr. Thune.
Aye.
Mr. Wicker.
Aye.
Mr. Blunt.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Rubio. Aye. Ms. Ayotte.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Heller.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coates.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Scott.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Aye. Mrs. Fisher. Aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Chiesa.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Chairman.
No.
The yeas are 12, the nays are 13.
And so the amendment fails.
May I offer the motion?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I move that S 1317 as amended be adopted and reported favorably by this committee, and I ask for a recorded vote.
And I second that amendment. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Nelson. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Pryor. Mrs. McCaskill. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Warner. Mr. Begich. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Heinrich.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Markey. Mr. Thune.
No.
Mr. Wicker.
No.
Mr. Blunt.
No by proxy.
Mr. Rubio. Ms. Ayotte.
No by proxy.
Mr. Heller.
No by proxy.
Mr. Coates.
No by proxy.
Mr. Scott.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Chiesa.
No by proxy.
Mr. Chairman.
No. No, I mean on the, yes. Yes.
Object, object.
We had it there for a minute.
Before we leave, can I just introduce Callie Howard, who's in the audience?
The yeas are 13, the nays are 12.
It carries. Before adjourning the hearing, I want to strongly say that this has been an extremely productive markup. And yes, there were at the end some contention, but when you look at all of the things that were accomplished and voted on, it is quite remarkable. So again, I thank, officially on the voice vote on the Cruz amendment, the noes have it. It's been an extremely effective markup, and so I'm grateful for all of the members, all of the committee staff, and all of the members' staff for making it possible. Having said that,
Mr. Chairman, before we leave, could I just thank everybody, especially Senator McCaskill and also Senator Schumer, for their work with us on this very important rental car safety bill. I wanted to recognize my constituent, Callie Howe, because Callie, are you here? Who was here before. And let me just say, we named this rental car safety bill after her daughters who were lost. And now we're going to make sure that the rental cars are safe. And we're going to work together on some perfecting amendments as we go to the floor. There's Callie. Just want to introduce you to everybody. Thank you, Callie.
I now ask unanimous consent that the committee staff, this is something we should have done at the beginning of the year, ask unanimous consent that the committee staff is authorized for the remainder of this Congress to make necessary technical and conforming changes in measures ordered reported by the committee. Having said that, I thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.